Thank you very much.
All right, awesome. All right, so Chris McCoy, creator of Storecoin and our big sponsor for the event. We want to thank you again for the, for all the support you've given us. I'm going to hand you the microphone. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Hey, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I got about 40 slides I'm going to whip through, so I recommend taking notes and firing your best questions at the end, because use this as an opportunity to get smarter with our project and get feedback from really sharp people in the room. So thanks, Michael. Thanks, CoinAgenda, for inviting us out. So cryptocurrency, we look at the initial use case. Satoshi's vision was, speaking of, do I have a clicker, actually? Is there a clicker? Probably could use that. Is there a switcher?
Chris, on that.
Right here, okay, perfect, thank you. So the original vision was payments, right? It was decentralized, peer-to-peer, censorship-resistant payments. And I think we can all accept the reality that Bitcoin seems to be evolving into a store value-based network, replacement for gold. So payments is not a core use case of Bitcoin. Now we can sort of argue Lightning, but let's not go down that road. Let's just say that payments is still there for the taking. That somebody's gonna create what we call sound, global, trusted money, currency that sits alongside the US dollar, the euro, and the major currencies of the world. And those currencies, that currency is going to sit alongside Visa. It's going to be used alongside MasterCard. That's the opportunity we see. Because every merchant in the world, every developer in the world, doesn't matter if it's Uber, it doesn't matter if it's the merchant on your local corner store, they hate that 2.5% fee plus 30 cents on every transaction. It's the enemy of commerce. And it happens to be a $21 trillion opportunity. So think of Storecoin. If Ripple is going after SWIFT, if going after banking, Storecoin's going after ACH, a $21 trillion market, debit, credit card purchases around the world. Think of us as a zero-fee blockchain, the first to potentially get high throughput, scalable transactions with decentralization correct, backed by what we call an enterprise-grade governance, a governance that looks a little like the checks and balances of the United States Constitution. Our big vision is to become zero-fee, programmable payments infrastructure for the globe. So think of EC2 instances on Amazon. Storecoin becomes general compute for programmable payments. This is important. We're not an ERC20 token. We're a new public blockchain, similar to EOS, Dash, Stellar, Ripple. We think Storecoin is a blue chip project that by 2019 will be one of the more well-known projects in the space. The token is Store. So what we like to say as a project, what we're doing every day, from technology to community to marketing, to coming out to events like this, is we're running a global campaign to get Store token elected amongst the world. We have a credible group of early investors that have joined alongside us at different phases in our project. Alphabet Fund, with Michael Turpin's a part of that. They're very strategic investors, very helpful to our project. Block Tower Capital worked very closely with Ari Paul. Some of you may know him. He's got a great follow on Twitter for the insights into the nuances of the space. Crypto IQ, Charlie Shrem, one of the pioneers of this technology, is a major investor in our project, and we're going to start actually utilizing him to start talking about our technology. Mike Arrington from Arrington XRP is one of our token partners, close advisor to the project. And our team. So a bit about myself. I started building businesses when I was like a 5-year-old kid and have been learning the craft of entrepreneurship, selling baseball card stores in 2nd grade, picking plums off of my uncle's tree, reselling it to our local neighborhood, running a lawnmower business, and then that changed to technology entrepreneurship in college. Went to college to play baseball, loved data, loved systems, started building social networks, built a social network for sports history, ran that for 10 years, came down to Silicon Valley, kind of went through the grinder, learned quite a lot, met Rag, our CTO, world-class distributed systems engineer, helped scale iCloud, Apple, helped scale Cisco, WebEx, And him and I have been kind of jamming since 2012. He's one of my best friends, one of the smartest people I know, probably one of the top distributed systems engineers in the Valley. Ari Paul works very closely with the project as well. We have a number of others on our team, but I'll highlight our advisors because they actually work with me kind of on a weekly basis to make decisions, to study our research. We work with a gentleman named Stephen McKeon, who's a professor of economics and finance at the University of Oregon, becoming kind of a global leader on security tokens. Nate Lubin helps us with communications and marketing. Previously, Nate was the head of digital for the White House, for Obama, and he was the head of digital for both of his campaigns. Noah Ruderman was on the infrastructure team at Facebook. Another great follow on Twitter at Devil's Compiler, if you like technical aspects of cryptocurrencies. And Mark Ramberg was formerly the general manager of Amazon Web Services and Media Entertainment, helps us with platform. So we're making a big claim here that we think we're the first protocol to get decentralization and throughput right, layer one, without lightning, without off-chain scaling, without sharding. And we do it with a novel consensus engine called BlockFin. The way to think about BlockFin is blockchains do three things all the same. They do one block at a time. There's one winner per block. And in the process of consensus, you have quite a lot of waste in terms of, we call it chain forks and orphan blocks. So what BlockFin does is instead of doing one block at a time, it processes multiple blocks in parallel. And practically how this works is as the current block is being finalized, we start taking the next set of incoming transactions and we start writing them to that waste. So as the current block is being finished, the next block's starting. So this gives us natural throughput. And from a comparison perspective, we look at this a little bit like the early days of oil back in the 1860s. The first use case for oil was only kerosene. It was light. The rest of the oil was thrown in the rivers, in the lakes. It was waste. As history showed us, gasoline became a product that Standard Oil was able to service, and they did that by advancing the research and engineering around refining. They were able to take waste and turn it into gas. We're doing a similar thing with consensus algorithms. So that's how we get base level throughput. We think potentially hundreds and thousands of transactions per second with hundreds and thousands of computers in the network. So we aim to be the preferred cryptocurrency for permanently fast, free, and scalable payments. Our tests so far have gotten us to hundreds of thousands of transactions across smaller node sets. We're now testing with 200 nodes. We do think by launch time we'll be at about 5,000 transactions per second with about 200 computers. And we'll be able to scale it up, we think, potentially into genuinely hundreds of thousands of transactions per second. And we look at just, everyone is aware of the current issues with first generation, second generation blockchains. Either they're decentralized but they're slow, or they're fast but they're not, or there's trade-offs in centralization. We aim to break all that up. These designs, if you want to actually dive into the data a little bit more, there's two links to take a look at. There's one that's storecoin.com/compare. That is our research internally looking at various consensus engines, governance systems, security systems, transaction throughput, decentralization, legal structures, you name it. And then also on our site, you can access this, storecoin.com. So our use case is not decentralized applications early on, it's just apps. It's letting you as a developer use Storecoin as a zero-fee mode of payments and incentives. So theoretically, as a developer, you can build directly on chain to Storecoin, similar to how you, as a developer, you can build on Stripe. And let's say you can pay users for doing things like signing up to your app, inviting their friends, taking that key action you need. We're making that dead simple, zero fees. So this actually opens up a door for micropayments, you can imagine. And one of the really interesting aspects of our economic model, because there are zero fees, the developer can actually take a cut of every payment. It's like a royalty. So instead of the banks getting that payment, the developer can get paid for every transaction on the network. How do we get to zero fee transactions? Everyone wants to know. It's very simple. We use a small amount of inflation capped at 2% per year. That inflation is dynamic, meaning it's pegged to the percentage of staking in the network. So if 10% of the circulating supply of tokens are staked to work on Storecoin, so think of staking as or mining the network. 10% of the circulating supply, then the inflationary rewards will be something like 0.6%. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. But as participation on the network grows, as decentralization grows, we offer more inflationary rewards. Then we cap it out at 51%. So at 51%, there are no extra rewards. You're basically earning diminishing returns. And the reason is because we think protocols fundamentally are they battle between being a store of value and a medium of exchange. And so we're using economic incentives to get a high degree of store value while still enabling the network to be a payments network, a zero-fee payments protocol. Early on, we'll have two types of workers, a validator, which is like a miner, and secondly, a message node. The message node, what we're doing there is separating the storage of the data from the actual active reaching consensus. This lets us lighten up the hardware so that eventually you as a user can run Storecoin on your phone and get paid tokens to work. We will introduce a decentralized security guard that scales out, that more or less is like an InfoSec worker. They run full nodes to study bad behavior across the validator pool, across the worker pool, across the transaction pool, the developer pool. And if they find bad actions, they reach consensus and they get paid tokens when they find bad actions. So it's almost like a decentralized security system, more or less. And then we will have a layer 2 scaling solution in place which will look similar to master nodes. And then we'll talk a little bit about governance, but our governance itself will be decentralized, and the data powering governance will be hosted by a gov node, which is like an IPFS server. So you can get paid tokens to host our governance. So we're building tools like this here that think about if you take a loan out of a bank, you need to know what your term is, what your interest rate is, what your payback period is. We're doing similar things, but for you to make an investment, whether you want to stake your Storecoin tokens. So we're designing consumer-grade experiences to make it as easy as it's ever been in this industry for people to make investment decisions to participate in the Storecoin network. Because again, we want 51% of the circulating supply to be staked. We can't force that, we can only incentivize that. So our team is not only building the protocol, we're building ancillary, we'll call it products that power the protocol. This is a very aggressive product that we're running, that we're operating on full cylinders around the world. Team is growing daily. Very proud of what we're doing. Real quick on block rewards. So let's say you take inflation. 80% of that inflation is paid out to consensus. 20% is paid out to a variety of different funds that incentivize different things on the network. So for instance, Storecoin, the foundation, will take a 1 to 5% cut of that will endow the foundation. A problem that we've seen with Zcash, Ethereum, they don't have sort of yearly ongoing endowments that strengthen the ability for the protocol to last forever. We do things like, if you're running a node, we like that, but we need you to keep it online. We need you to actually give us processing power. We need you to give you need to be uptime, basically. We have to incentivize that for that. So if you run a node, we will give you daily interest based upon different hours in the day, how long you stay up. When we launch, we'll launch with a limitation on how many workers can participate, and we'll scale that up as we reach these different thresholds. But there'll be backup workers, so if one worker goes offline, the backup worker picks up right away. So we have to incentivize for those backup workers. And then decentralized security guards themselves, they're in governance, and when they vote, they're actually also incentivized to vote for things that have staking and holding elements. So they get paid more money when the network's staked. This ensures that when Storecoin likely wants to introduce smart contracts, which is a feature, file storage, that it will require for governance to vote on that for a percentage of the network to be staked in order for that feature to launch. So this is a big idea. If you heard me talk in Singapore, we didn't talk about this. The question becomes, if you're disrupting the transaction fee, how do the banks get paid? How do the credit card networks get paid? How do you get distribution? If no one gets paid, how do you disrupt the market? Our solution to this is to be able to cut in the banks, the Stripes, the processors of the world into the block reward. So instead of getting paid by the merchant, by the developer, every transaction fee, they just get a cut of the block reward, much like a miner does. So this enables us to go do deals with Stripe, Square, banks like Wells Fargo, and similar types of entities, the fintech stack around the world where they still get paid. So this is how we get into the cash register. This is how we become global money, because we align with the economics of their businesses, and that's how we get distribution. So governance. Today this launched. I shared it with Michael this morning. Bitcoin.com wrote an article and covered our governance model, which is, we've relatively been a quiet project to date. It was pretty cool. Our thesis on governance is this, and why they're important, simply is in this chart here. As you have law, banking, and military infrastructure to enforce contracts, as that grows, alongside trust growing in the system, governance essentially injects those rules into complex markets, and it sort of artificially introduces trust into the market. As you grow those two spectrums, commerce and trade around the world should grow. So I'll talk about this tonight at the dinner, but we're in the very primitive stage of these governance systems and crypto networks, and this is why we're still at prototypes, very low usage on decentralized applications. Major companies aren't putting large amounts of daily throughput in because of trust. So our governance system looks a little like the checks and balances based system. The short version of it is, if the decentralized branch votes on an initiative, it could be a feature, it could be monetary policy changes, it could be key leadership, like I for myself could get fired by governance, then the executive branch can actually overrule that, similar to how the presidency of the United States can overrule if the Senate, if Congress votes on something. But then what happens is it goes back for another vote. That if higher voting thresholds are reached, that the decentralized workers branch, all the node runners, the workers, they can actually overrule the executive branch. So in blockchain world, first principles thinking on governance is basically checks and balances over the core developer team. And so we've created a system that does that. Not getting into it too much, we think it's, we call it enterprise grade. We think that this is how we're going to get the Ubers, the Pepsis, the Nikes of the world to build on top of Storecoin, because they're going to trust how change happens, they're going to understand how they participate in it, their lawyers are going to be able to sign off on it, and they're going to be able to assign a risk score to it. So one really cool aspect of governance is it's more or less like an app that people vote, they get messages, they get timelines, they get mentioned. It looks a little like a chat app with a voting mechanism. The issue here is who hosts that app. If the app is actually hosted by a central server, central entity such as Storecoin, theoretically if Storecoin doesn't like a vote, it could drop the votes in the architecture. You can see this here in this design. So we have to actually decentralize governance itself, so that when a vote happens, it's actually processed by a network of decentralized computers, very similar to a decentralized app. The workers who host that data are paid tokens. This ensures that no vote can be censored. This is how we take this checks and balances based rules engine that puts governance across the dev team, and we make it live forever on computers around the world. It doesn't rely on Storecoin. And then we're starting to design through what that app looks like. You can kind of get a sneak peek here. This is a desktop version. But if you're a part of governance, you see a summary of what the bill is, a description of the bill, any sort of attachments that are needed, who created it, how much funded it, what the next steps are. You can vote, and then you can kind of post your rationale. So we take very parliamentary procedure and we put it in an app and make it as basic as possible. And we also give communication channels for governance to communicate privately and publicly. We do have an ecosystem fund. Footprint Ventures will invest in companies that will build on top of the Storecoin blockchain. That's starting now. That will likely be run out of Seattle. We have a great early batch of partners. We just brought on Cumberland Mining and Circle. The core team, myself, we have 8-year vesting, which basically says that we're here to build global zero-fee payments infrastructure for a long time. This isn't we're really committed to this vision, and we're thinking very long-term about it. From a treasury perspective, there's 1 billion tokens, and we recently made a decision where 20% of the token supply will be locked up in a 1,000-year treasury schedule. So what this means is if your great-great-great-great-granddaughter in the future is the head of Storecoin, she'll have access to Genesis Block Treasury to fund the foundation. Now you could imagine that if Storecoin is around then, the tokens are probably worth more than they are now. That could be an aggressive treasury, but this is how we think about building global infrastructure. We're the first project in the world to think about this. 33% of the token supply will be sold. We're in the process of doing sort of private pre-sales. We do have a public sale coming around the corner. It'll be an auction-based sale. It'll be small. We'll do a couple of these. We'll likely do a larger ICO next year. And then 46% for the first 100 years is for network incentives, for acquisitions, growing the ecosystem, and for team. And so this is our treasury model. So simply put, this is sort of our thesis, is the more zero-fee payments and transactions there are across time, the more global commerce and trade expands. We think the future of commerce is crypto networks. We think zero fees is the innovation. And we think it's going to take time, and we're focused on incentivizing the right properties for this to exist. So our mission is to become zero-fee programmable cryptocurrency that can compete with Visa-like networks and beyond. It's not going to be Bitcoin Cash. It's too slow, too expensive. It's not going to be Dash. Too slow, too expensive. Stellar's too centralized. It's going to be Storecoin. Soon, you're going to see Storecoin alongside Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and Discover. Thank you.
All right, great job. Questions? Anybody have questions for him? Yep, in the back. Just tell us where you're from. Your name?
Hi, I'm Adrian Scott, CEO of Soma Capital and head of technology for Decent.bet, a crypto casino. 3 questions. I'll try to order these in simplicity. The 8-year vesting schedule is via smart contract or what mechanism?
We're actually building a tool for it to be through smart contract, but it's all offline now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with 1,000-year...
There aren't actually tools for this kind of thing, actually, sadly. So we have to build it all or fund it, someone to build it. But I will say this, is we're in talks with BitGo right now about having them be our actual official wallet partner. Okay. So we'd sit alongside Ripple. They're about to launch Stellar and Dash. And so we get that deal done, we can actually build that infrastructure on top of the BitGo APIs.
Okay.
Yeah.
And with the length of vision and so on, is your algorithm quantum resistant?
Say that again?
Do you have a quantum computing resistant algorithm for your...
Yeah, we've had this question a few times. We think that the economic rules of the system actually prevent quantum anything. The system, like for instance, let's say you own 20% of the tokens, theoretically, and you're participating in the network as a worker. In theory, you should earn 20% of the rewards, right? Not in Storecoin. We automatically limit you to 5% per block. So this limits attack vectors and also spreads out the reward pool for more participation, more decentralization.
Is there a private key, public key kind of mechanism on the wallet?
It's definitely public-private key mechanism, traditional blockchain.
So yeah, there would be a question there on that piece with the quantum resistance.
We can dive a little bit more offline into it.
Okay, sure, yeah. And then lastly, so with the throughput you're talking about, I did not quite get the mechanism of the architecture for achieving that throughput. It sounds like maybe you have a few hundred nodes?
Yeah, right now we have 200 nodes set up. It's being designed to be into the tens of thousands of nodes. And so Amazon actually just yesterday permissioned us to go up to 200 in the testing environment. They limit how many instances you can run. Yeah. But the base layer design itself, I'm happy to share the architecture, especially if you're on the technology side. Would love your feedback into that. It's novel. We think it's a breakthrough. It's a 2-tier architecture that basically does parallel pipeline block processing. So it's not like your standard UXTO.
And is there a selection mechanism for which of those?
There is.
Which folks get to know?
It's a leader list selection. It's a leader list consensus. There's not one winner. So every participant in the network actually gets rewarded. I didn't talk about that, but that's potentially a large breakthrough in economics today. It's like a slot machine a little bit. You pull, maybe you win, maybe you don't. We've designed it to be much more like how people work. You go to work for 10 hours and you get paid for 10 hours, and so it's leaderless.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Good questions.
All right, well, great. Let's give it up for Chris. Nice job, man. Nicely done. Oh, you got another question? Sorry about that. I'll cut you off. Here, one more question.
So to displace the current 2.5% or 4%, depending on where you go with American Express, my understanding is that 2.5%, Sean Barger Equilibrium, is not just about the expenditure for managing the transaction, but also dealing with a great deal of fraud that they have to deal with on an annual basis. So if you look at Visa doing $3 trillion in transactions a year, 2.5% is just to cover them on all the losses and fraud. My question is, if you go to zero, or if you make your money based on the the delta of managing the what was you said was 6.6% is the potential annual revenue for you guys of the transactions shared. Where do you deal with the fraud?
Yeah, so two parts to that question, two answers there. So one is when we went with the inflationary design, the genesis of Storecoin was actually to become a blockchain for like McDonald's and chain stores and franchises. We were building a chat system for those business systems, hierarchy based, and we realized that the only way we're going to get into McDonald's is if we solve zero fees, because frankly we have to compete against that 2.5%, 30 cents. So we studied all these different ways to do that, and we arrived on inflationary economics. And initially we started with 5%, kind of fixed, and then as our economic designs got more advanced, we moved to a dynamic inflation, pegged to staking. But we realized right away major attack vectors DDoSing the spam, or the inflation. So if you're a bad actor, you come in and say, I'm going to try to kill the chain by getting rid of all its rewards. If there's no rewards, no one's going to process the transactions. And so we took a two-step process to that design. Design one is every transaction that's sent, there's a requirement to be sent a small security bond that gets paid back to you as the sender with interest after it sort of gets approved by our security guard network. So more or less, you'll be required to, and if you're found to be guilty of some form of payment fraud, which there's every system there's fraud, and we recognize that. And with crypto networks, fraud's going to get more and more complex. Attack vectors are going to be emergent. We realize that as a nonprofit, we won't have the ability to solve these emergent attack vectors fast enough. So we need decentralized security. So we need to enable a new type of worker who has InfoSec experience, payment fraud experience, machine learning experience to run nodes, to study transaction behavior, to study behavior within the worker network, to look at Sybil attacks, you name it, long range, and to incentivize them to not only find bad actions, but to get paid when they do. And so combined with the security bond and this decentralized security guard network, we think that Storecoin can kind of scale with the emergent types of attack vectors. We do think there will always be attacks. And the last piece to this, within our consensus engine itself, traditional blockchains, you mine publicly or locally. You compile on your machine and you publish publicly. You theoretically could be lining up all sorts of machines to attack the chain, and no one can see it. With Storecoin, BlockFin consensus, because it's a two-tier architecture, every node who touches the network, it's always public. So essentially, nodes can always see what other nodes are doing. It makes it more difficult to attack.
It's really my question's about liability. Right? So you're going to pay the vendor. The vendor gets paid. So I'm just trying to figure out what happens when you don't get paid.
When the protocol doesn't get paid?
Yeah.
For a block? Oh, I mean, it's like a loss to the protocol. I mean, it will force the protocol, the foundation, to strengthen its security systems to prevent future loss. That's an incentive to the protocol to have world-class security. It's a great question.
I think we have to, unfortunately, I hate to do this, but we have to, so Chris, great job. Let's give him a big round of applause. Nicely done. And Chris you're going to see him later tonight also, so you can ask him more questions at the dinner.